At the time, it was the most exciting Stanley Cup game of its era and allowed the Montreal Canadiens to win the 1973 Stanley Cup. But the lead up to Game 6 at Chicago Stadium was so bloody bizarre, I don't even think I would believe it even if I was not telling the truth, especially what happened in Game 5. Now, the Montreal Canadiens obviously were in the midst of a mini dynasty. They had won in 68, 69, and 71. Now, this team had a very interesting monument of players, including Hall of Famers Yvon Cornway, Ken Dryden, Guy Lafleur, Jacques Laperriere, Guy Lapointe, Jacques Lemaire, Frank Mahovlich, Henri Richard, Larry Robinson, Serge Savard, Steve Shutt, who did not play but was part of the Montreal system. So you're looking at half the Montreal Canadiens were Hall of Famers. Now, what was ironic about this, ladies and gentlemen, Montreal had won both games at home, 8-3 and 4-1. Chicago rebounded for a 7-4 victory in Game 3 on May 3rd in Chicago. But Chicago Stadium, Montreal blanked Chicago 4-0. And they're saying, hey, they're coming back to Montreal for Game 5. Montreal's going to win this series. Say like LA Knight. Losing 8-7 in one of the most bizarre games of all time. So it set up a very interesting Game 6. Now, in that contest, Pitt Martin, which was always a thorn in Montreal's side for most of that playoff, scored twice. He got scored on a shot in a mini breakaway against Ken Dryden from Makita and Stapleton. And then Serge Savard made a mistake in his own end zone on the power play, and he scored less than a minute later to make it 2-0. But the big goal, of course, was Henri Richard scoring a goal on a line with Guy Lafleur and Frank Mahovlich. Now, that's a super line. 12 seconds left in the period, and it was very similar to his Game 7 counter that put away Chicago in that Stanley Cup. Now, the second period belonged to the Mahovlich brothers, and here's what happened. Pete tied it up with his only fourth of the postseason from Laperriere and Chuck Lefley to tie 2-2 at 5:05. But then Reggie Houle, who was out the door with the Nordiques very soon after, scored on a feed from Pete Mahovlich and Chuck Lefley. Now, you wouldn't think a Reggie Houle, Pete Mahovlich, Chuck Lefley line would work, but it worked here. Lefley had fed Mahovlich, and he scored at 6:37, so it's 2-2. But here's it gets weird. The no-name player that we always have trouble pronouncing, Kriskow, or Dave Crisco, scored a second of the postseason. The Titans scored 8:32 on a feed from Chico Mackey and Ralph Backstrom. Backstrom getting back at his team a little bit. But then Frank Mahovlich made a 4-3 at 10:54 on a feed from Lapointe and Cornway. But Martin, with his hat trick, almost a natural, scored on the power play from Dennis Hull. He's 10th in the postseason to tie at 4-4 at 17:05. Now, the third period ended up all in Montreal. Cornway scored his record-breaking 15 goal of the postseason at 18-13, and Mark Tardif followed on a feed from Cornway and Lemaire. Now, that was a line. Mark Tardif, Cornway, and Lemaire. My God, ladies and gentlemen. 12:42. Now, Montreal had the majority of the penalties in the first period. Jerry Korab went off for roughing at 3:40, but Jimmy Roberts also went off at 3:40. Pitt Martin was caught for holding at 8:21, with Jimmy Roberts taking another penalty at 10:35 and Murray Wilson at 12:39. So Chicago was on the power play late in the period, and it paid off. But in the third period, Chicago lost their mind a little bit. Bill White was called an interference at 2:25. Phil Russell caught for holding at 10:20, and Korab was caught again at hooking. And at the end of the period, Jimmy Roberts, again, he had a really terrible game. He took another penalty at 16:58, and Russell took another penalty in the third at 11:29, which was made the difference. Now, the scratchers from Montreal were Bob Murdoch and Steve Shutt, and Chicago scratchers were Keith Magnuson and Dick Redmond, so they were kind of soft in the back then. Now, actually, Lloyd Gilmore was a referee with the great Matt Pavlich and John D'Amico doing it. Now, the video highlights of this Stanley Cup have been posted, not say recently, but in recent months. It's quite interesting to see both teams with the type of players they had and all the Hall of Famers. Now, the idea, ladies and gentlemen, but Chicago, they always had trouble with Montreal on the defensive side. But let's look at what Chicago was up against, okay? The 73 Montreal team had Guy Lafleur, Marc Tardif, Yvan Cournoyer, Réjean Houle, Claude Larose, Henri Richard, Murray Wilson, Pete Mahovlich, Chuck Lefley, Jacques Lemaire, and Frank Mahovlich, and Steve Shutt as a spare. Defensemen, again, you had Laperriere, Lapointe, Roberts, who went back from the forward line to give Peter and Frank more ice time, Serge Savard, Larry Robinson, and Pierre Bouchard. Now, ironically, ladies and gentlemen, Guy Lapointe, Serge Savard, and Robinson, within 3 years, were considered still the big three for the NHL. Now, Montreal outshot Chicago 33-27, and Michel Place was the backup. Thank God we didn't have to use him. So just as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, Montreal won Game 1 8-3, won Game 2 4-1, lost 7-4 to Chicago in Game 3, won 4-0, then 8-7. Now, Montreal took apart the Chicago defense in the whole series, scoring 33 goals, which is totally amazing. But Ken Dryden was a sieve as well, giving up 15 goals in total in Game 3 and Game 5, and 4 goals in Game 4. And it's kind of weird he still had the mesh goalie mask. Now, the 73 Stanley Cup Finals was kind of an end of an era because Montreal, again, the Tardif and Houle were lured to the WHA, and later Frank Mahovlich. And by the 74 season, again, Dryden had left in a contract dispute where Michel Place and Wayne Thomas had to take over. Now, this team, again, 11 Hall of Famers playing, 1 Hall of Famer behind the bench. And ironically, ladies and gentlemen, NBC didn't carry games 2 and 3. CBC carried all 6 games. And for what I saw in the video, I don't think Danny Gallivan had a color man for that contest, so I don't know exactly what happened in Game 6. Now, Montreal had defeated the Sabres 4-2, and the Flyers in the semifinals have set up an original 6 final. Ironically, they lost the Sabres in 75 and bet the Flyers in 76. Now, Yvan Cournoyer and Jacques Lemaire both had 11 points in the finals for the Habs. The Conn Smythe Trophy went to Cournoyer, who had 6 goals. Again, it was Henri Richard's 11th and last win of the Stanley Cup, and Scotty Bowman's first. And, of course, the almost won in 75, but they couldn't get past the French Connection. So the 73 Stanley Cup Finals, Montreal and Chicago, I don't know if there's any full games out there. If anybody that watches YouTube to see there's full games, please let me know. Because I've seen the highlights, and just seeing a young Serge Savard, a young Marc Tardif, Guy Lafleur with a helmet on, Frank and Peter just chewing up the ice. It's amazing. And I really think they should have won in 72, but then again, Guy Lafleur wasn't a player. And Guy Lafleur wasn't a 50-goal scorer. He was learning from Henri Richard at the feet of the Pocket Rocket. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there's any Chicago fans out there, Pitt Martin would have been the Conn Smythe Trophy winner if they would have won in 7, but that big loss in Game 5 for Montreal to not take the cup home on home ice, that was a misnomer. But in the last 2 games, he scored 13 goals and he only had 1 victory. Pretty freaky. No defense, as we say. The no defense series, the NDS, as my dad used to call it. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what they're doing here with our Montreal Canadiens Vintage Podcast, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share.